Welcome to Blind Shovel, an arts and music podcast. Today I speak with Berlin-based musician André Baum. Enjoy. Hey.
Hey.
What's up?
Hanging here in Berlin on the first snowy day of the year.
It snows there?
Apparently, yeah. I mean, it's been, I think it's been less snow in the last years. But, yeah.
Well, that sounds beautiful.
We get a little sprinkle.
You like snow? What's your relationship to snow?
I love snow. I was just thinking about it today. I love how it frosts the air. It makes the mind clear. It blankets things. It makes things, a little bit.
You like it like in a dirty city like New York?
Yeah, I mean, there's that. I mean, there's so many great sort of metaphors that snow bring up. But yeah, blanketing a city in this beautiful powder, and then you have about 4 hours before it turns into gray slush. So it's really like a lesson in the temporariness of everything.
So you live in Berlin?
I live in Berlin. Yeah.
How long has that been again?
9 years.
9 years. What spurred that move? I don't recall.
I was in New York. I graduated college. I had gone back to live in Nepal for a while, teaching, living in a school, which was amazing and just kind of nice to be in a place where it wasn't so much about me creating all the time. And I got back to New York and went completely 180 into producing music and artists and events. And I didn't really want to be in New York, actually. And then I got a call from a friend of the family, this artist who, she said, yeah, you should come to Berlin. It'd be good for you for a little bit. It's supposed to be a summer. And then I just thought, well, this is better than being in New York for now. So yeah, stuck it out.
What were you making before? You mentioned a 180 into music. Were you making visual art?
Well, no, it was more of a 180 from being in a situation of teaching and sort of service. And I was always making music, and there's always an intersection of visual art, music, and writing. But yeah, it just had a different tone when I was living at this school with kids. It was it wasn't really about what I wanted to do. It was more like what the kids would respond to or what they were interested in. Oh, you want a little poetry today? Oh, you haven't played this ukulele before. Here you go. So it was very dynamic. It was a nice respite from being in my own mind all the time.
Yeah, the self is quite limiting in the end.
Yeah, in the end. Exactly. So in a way, Berlin was sort of I don't know. It's sort of a full circle for me right now, actually, because it's definitely been, let's say, a decade of hard work in music and just, yeah, I don't know, letting go, I guess, on some level, while also there's that funny dichotomy of letting go what you want the most,
Sure.
For things to sort of happen organically, naturally, and yeah, reminds me actually of that time in the school. Yeah.
So I don't know a ton about Berlin, but do people say shit to you like, oh, you moved here right when it was on the decline, or it used to be cool?
Yeah, 100%.
And what do you think they're really talking about? And do you think it's valid and true?
I mean, there are a few things that come to mind. One is it's the highest growing property market, I think, in the world still. So there's an immense amount of development happening really quickly. A lot of external investors and businesses coming in that really have nothing to do with Berlin and even maybe Germany. Also, Berlin is essentially an anarchist city. It was I mean, I have no memory of these, events and things that people tell me, but, you just roll up and squat in a place, and take it over. And now you have these people who are now landlords for buildings that they essentially just squatted. Rent used to be, I mean, it's still kind of cheap relative to New York or whatever, but, rent used to be like $50 or something, $100,
Jesus.
So, you'd also have like the toilets on the street or, I don't know. I mean, these are things, again, that are not from my own personal experience, but I think anyone who had lived here before the wall, especially, and then through the 90s and early 2000s, also musically speaking, I think a lot of the electronic music that became such a center point of Berlin now was kind of in its early stages of forming. And there's an amazing story that a friend of mine, Adam Collins, was telling me about post 9/11. Not only did it shut down both the spirit and the actual clubbing of New York, and killed vinyls coming out of Long Island, because they were just seen as these black masses on X-rays. But it caused a lot of these New York DJs and producers, people that had moved to New York for that scene, to move to Berlin, and which kind of jump started the whole early 2000s minimal techno and all these funny sort of cause and effects. But anyway, that was apparently the heyday of Berlin for that.
So were you interested in the same music before moving to Berlin?
Loosely. I mean, to be honest, my reference point for like what was great music were sort of, Bob Dylan and Jay-Z and Moby and, these sort of names we all probably know. And I had dabbled in house and techno when I was younger, and I would go to find dollar records and spin some things for teen parties and stuff. It was, but it was very sort of loose interest. But then I found, when I was 12, through a music teacher at my school, this program Reason, to start making electronic music. And then I started realizing, oh, that's like a, drum and bass feel. That's more hard techno. That's more, and all these things were labeled that way. But I didn't really know who was making what. So when I got here, to be honest, most of the people that, me and my friends would be now considering to be heroes or icons, I had no idea who they were. So in many ways, Berlin was a really humbling experience to move here musically. Also realizing that like everybody and their mother were like amazing producers and sonic scientists, So I was like, okay, I know I can write a song and sing and play piano and sample and produce, but I don't really know how to use an EQ or a compressor or how to mix music. So that was sort of part of the process of learning not only what was going on and what my tastes were in that kind of music, but also how to make it confidently, and actually,
So you've been interested in this type of music for a long time, it sounds like.
Yeah, it came up. I mean, to be honest, I moved here thinking I was going to make a record that was a bit more in the Gorillaz world, kind of pop oriented, indie pop, essentially, in the electronic music. And then it slowly, the whole club world ate me and spit me out in a creative way. And I, to be honest, a few years just sort of tried making a lot of things that I don't think really had much to do with my authentic voice, which I think is a necessary process of being an artist. Losing and finding and then finally being like, okay, I'm tired of this. Like, this is really what I want to say, which is sort of what I feel like at the moment, actually.
And that manifested in the People record. Well, and also you have a different thing going on, right?
Yeah, there were a few things this year. I mean, couple years in the making, but yeah, I released this People record with my music partner, Gonzalo Gulp. It's his DJ name. And that's a collaborative thing that's, sort of referencing minimal techno and electronic club music, but also Massive Attack and hip hop from New York. And a little bit post-punk. And so it was sort of all wrapped up into something that we both loved, but we weren't necessarily hearing around us. And then I released a solo record as Beyondré, which was actually, to tie the story together, was the record I wanted to make when I first moved to Berlin after doing an EP called Beyondré is Born in New York. And anyway, hundreds of songs later, and now whatever that's been 8-9 years, it's out. It's called Berlin Blue, and it really has nothing to do, I think, with what I thought originally sonically, but in theory, that's sort of my little bookend from 2014 till now.
Is this an alter ego?
Yeah, it's. I realized like there are a lot of ways to approach choosing names or using your own name, and I think because I've always loved film and cinema, that was essentially what I wanted to study and did study media studies, which became filmmaking, which became studio art through media. And the idea of becoming a character in a role as a way to best express something authentically is really interesting to me, because I don't know about other people, but sometimes I find that my own attachment to my own name and my own history and however many millions of times someone has called you by your name is like so sometimes wrapped up in creating, whereas sometimes creating a character and falling into this character is really freeing.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'll hear this often from musicians and never from artists. So there must be something about that performative immediacy that you need that wall for.
I was thinking about that the other day, because it's like I'm kind of delineating at the moment, both in terms of like my time and energy, but also in terms of like kind of delineating in my mind. So I get, I don't know, it's like having a bit of a dinner party with all these different selves, and they can't be too close, they need to be sort of a respectable distance on some level. So, but I was thinking that, me, André Baum, is like, if I wrote something or published a writing or did a video installation, I would say, obviously that's just me making things. And even now I'm working on a record that's more like, okay, André Baum, the songwriter, sitting at a piano and writing songs. But then, there are these spaces of exploration that feel like it's not really about me necessarily, or me even. I mean, I like what Laurie Anderson said about advice to young artists, where being creative doesn't necessarily mean you're expressing anything about yourself. You could just be expressing some curiosity about something else. And she says, we're sitting here and I'm listening to the birds and I'm wondering, what could I play that would turn them on, And I think especially in our, very capitalist, individualist, YouTube, Instagram centered world, it's like, I don't know. That was sort of a revelation for me, actually. I mean, maybe it seems sort of obvious,
sure,
but
no, it does. I don't think it does in this culture. I mean, I would throw literalist on top of that, because there's this kind of, if you create it, you advocate it mentality, or if you write a story with something containing something, you're like politically advocating for it,
right?
And that's the ultra stamp of, I don't know what you would call it. It's just a very restrictive way of thinking about art making, where it's more like a psychological factory where you put these ingredients in and these opinions, and then at the end you get this art. I think that this kind of industrial way of thinking about it is kind of a problem.
Well, I mean, I'm sort of dancing with all these things for myself, because, of course, I'm trying to be honest with myself. Like, for sure, there's a lot of that influence in me as a person. I mean, whatever, being raised in Manhattan and, having artistic and poetic parents, but still being in a culture that's like, it kind of warps the creative practice into product, especially now. So I like playing with the idea of product and creating a package of something in a self-contained world, and even how that tickles the brain for someone to, be excited by it or something. But at the same time, yeah, I mean, I think maybe the hardest, the most essential thing is to remain playful and curious without, an agenda, I guess.
Yeah, I also think you have to rid yourself of caring about one's reputation. I think Burroughs has a quote that says the exact opposite, but then again, he fucked little boys. Didn't seem to mind too much. But I think he was saying like the most important thing to do is maintain your reputation. I think that's nonsense, especially in this age where it's just like, I don't know, there's just, I think you would go insane if you really, really were trying to like control your reputation on the internet.
I mean, it's like twofold. So on one hand, I've been also thinking about this word shame, right? Like shame is so much in, sort of a puritanical influence in our culture in general. Like if you're exposed, I mean, to be like under 12 years old these days must be insane. I can't even begin to imagine what that's like, but yeah, I mean, the embrace of shamelessness, not to say I'm going to go, pissing naked in front of people in the park, but like, there's a sense of being free of one's own attachment, my attachment to who I am and what I have to make, which is, it's a process, I think, of just reminding oneself of what's really underneath all that.
Yeah. I do want to get back to, it's very important because it's unique and we've talked about it. Both of your parents are in the arts. And I've always wondered about that dichotomy because oftentimes you'll talk to at least like suburban artists and their act of art making can sometimes be an act of rebellion against their environment and their parents. And I don't think that's the case. Like I know people with art parents, and it seems different. There's kind of this understanding of where the child's trying to go or the teenager. Sometimes there's support, but at the very least, there's like you're in the same world in some sense. Does that sound accurate?
Yeah, I mean, especially as I got older and more sort of professional about it, or not so, 100 new ideas every day kind of thing. I think they got much more comfortable and supportive, but they've always been basically supportive because they're both on the, they've been on the business side of things, but they're also both pretty extraordinary artists, and even now, for instance, my mother is painting again and doing these extraordinary, like large abstract oil paintings. And we have conversations about that process and the ideas behind it and the idea of destruction and power structures. And then now I'm starting to make some music for her paintings. We did a piece actually a few years ago. And so that kind of dialogue, it's been amazing, and my dad's basically a poet and just a crazy old New Yorker and, and also a window to a world that doesn't really exist anymore. So yeah, I would say, of course, it's been sort of essential to my process, I guess. But there's always going to be something to resist or rebel against. And because, as supportive as parents can be, there's always going to be some, maybe even going to the opposite side of, basically trying to find my own voice, in the sea of people that have extraordinary voices, something like that.
Yeah, I just remember being taken aback by how good the art was that your father was selling at that one Javits Center event.
Oh, the print fair. Yeah.
And just to be like around that kind of work when you're young, that's very interesting to me.
Well, what's sweet was also, it was not only the experience of being around that work, but also knowing that his way, he's older than he wouldn't want me to say his age, but he's older. So he was an art dealer in a time when it didn't mean mega bucks, maybe it's like it still is maybe with what he said, like $1,000 for something because you want to like start a collection of prints or $500, and you'd give the money to the artist first before you got it. It's just a very different environment than what people know to be as like the art world now.
So is that like deep in the bloodline? Is there artists all the way
No,
down, or is that him
no,
and your mom?
he just popped out, basically of college and loved surrealism and just was kind of, full speed ahead to, I mean, he wanted to be a writer. He is a writer, he's a poet and a writer. But, life circumstances where he needed to make money, and early on he was in New York and, followed the thing that was his passion otherwise. And just little by little, created this business for himself. But again, like, I think that same scenario now would be almost impossible.
Yeah.
Especially in New York. So it's so much about the time that it's from. And I mean, anyway, it's not deep in the bloodline. Like, that was basically where it started.
Just curious.
Yeah.
How do you feel about surrealism at this age?
You mean like 1920s surrealism, or the general idea of surrealism, or?
1920s, because I feel like there's this, I still find value in it, but I probably found more value in it when I was like a teenager. And there's kind of a trope of, especially with teenage boys, liking this work for whatever reason. I think that's often said to diminish it, but there's something still very alluring about it to me.
For sure. I mean, the nature of it is essentially like the big wide-eyed curiosity of the subconscious, and also the revolutionary power of accessing that. And, I think there are different angles to see what surrealism is or was. But to me, so much of it was, as one of the art shows that I saw a couple of years ago, called Revolution by Night, a revolution of the mind. It's like, it's essentially a very powerful space. Of course, I think the superficial reading of it is like, oh, it's crazy, like weirdo stuff that really has no reference to reality. But as my dad likes to say, surrealism is in between reality and fantasy. Mm-hmm. It's not fantasy, but it's not quite reality. Of course I relate to it. I mean, I'm named after André Breton, so I feel in some psychic way, I have to be sort of like, karmically linked to it. But, I would say, of course, it runs through almost everything I do, whether I know it or not.
Yeah, I mean, I hear it in the music for sure. More like a subterranean thing. I don't know I wouldn't say it's surreal per se.
I think it's more like a way of, it's like a kind of, how do I say it? Like, it kind of deconstructs the mind a little bit to engage in ideas like what surrealism posits. So I think, having been around that my whole life, and whatever, you see a figure in a painting and it's like, but that figure has like a vase as an arm and like a cantaloupe on its, like, what am I looking at? And sort of very quickly, being told visually that you can do that. You can combine things that don't normally come together. You can, hold up an egg and say, this is a fork. What does that do to the mind? And so I think naturally, having been around that for so long, that the way I approach music and also film, I mean, the way that I am imagining what I want to be putting together for the music is very much like that, actually. It's like putting different influences together to create new narrative, different sounds together to create new worlds. Some organic mixed with not organic, voice being manipulated. But, again, it's always like what the personal history is that guides you, I guess.
And obviously surrealism is rooted in Europe. Do you think there's a big difference for you between making in Europe and making in New York?
I've been thinking probably too much about this for these years, and especially right now. I love Berlin for the freedom it allows, freedom to fail, because it's been a space. It's very international. There's a lot of people coming for different reasons and different influences that all meet. It hasn't been very expensive to live here. So, and also people don't really care what you're doing, for better or worse. So that's what gets me into the New York side, where it's been like an island of Berlin for me that I can come to, and it's my base and it's my place to experiment and do things that I wouldn't necessarily have the time or space or money to do in New York. That being said, being a New Yorker, the moment I get into New York, I'm just like walking down the street the way I would normally walk in New York, and I feel the energy of it, and ideas come differently and melodies are different. I just feel something about it that really I miss actually at this point in Berlin.
Can you elaborate on people not caring what you do?
I mean, the joke is that there are a few things they tell you when you get here. First one is, you miss the best Berlin. And the second thing is don't ask people what they do. And, coming from New York, I mean, not that I'm like entrepreneur shaking hands every day, but it's like, my idea was like, well, what do you mean? Like, of course I want to know what people do. But for people here, it's like, it's essentially kind of a capitalist question. It's like, how do I define you? How do I put you in a box based on the work that you do? So if you do ask that question, a lot of people will be like, you mean for money or like in general? So yeah, the joke is that there are people that I've known for years through the club scene or through music or through art that we didn't really know necessarily what we did. We'd have conversations about other things. We really care about each other. And we don't necessarily hang out much outside of a certain time frame or party or something. But then you realize actually you're completely aligned in what you do musically or whatever. And then you end up making a record together, but it could take 3 years, which is nice. Cause it's also like, do you actually want to hang out with this person? Do you actually trust this person? Do you feel open with this person? Do you feel safe? In which case, if you happen to align, then in what you do for work or creativity is something really special.
Yeah, I could imagine that being frustrating because I like to work and I like to work with people, but I also could understand the release that comes with that, where people aren't a means to an end.
I mean, I'm sort of, again, always oscillating here. Because on the other hand, I do like things to happen, quickly. If I have an idea, like it's like strike while the iron's hot. Whereas here it can be kind of like, yeah, iron's hot. It'll be hot for a while. It's cool. Like, we can always reheat it, it's like, and I don't really want to lose that energy, that potential energy. So it can be a little frustrating too sometimes, but again, there's like a grass is always greener thing. Cause then in New York, it can be really like, okay, wait a minute. We're like really rushing this,
So yeah, that actually brings me to people. How long did that album take, and what did that release process look like?
Well, so it's a really beautiful, for me, story because it was basically why I ended up staying in Berlin. I think it was 2016. I was on a dance floor, early morning, turned to my left, and started a conversation with Gonzalo, and we kind of just spoke in band names. It was like Psychic TV. Oh, like JJ Cale. Oh, JJ Cale. And it was like within 5 or 6 names, we realized that we should just go make music. So we left. We went back. His wife was at home being like, oh, who's this dude? And we made, I think, 2 or 3 of the songs that were on our first EP. And then, over the last years, we've just been exploring and, did a few other little, like a remix here and worked on some other stuff together. But basically getting all these songs together, which is like part 1. And then part 2 is figuring out really like what you want to do with them or who wants to put it out or whatever. And also for me, every album to me, an album is a film. So it has a concept, it has a narrative. It's hard for me to imagine making a record that's just like a bunch of songs. So the album we put together, it's called Out of Our Hands, which sort of references the fatefulness of our meeting. And also just like, here it is, it's very organic, it's handmade. And also a lot of this is by chance, the sort of magic space of letting go, which he taught me a lot, actually, to be honest. Like, I think when we first met, I was still very much the New Yorker side of like, okay, let's make this perfect. Like let's re-record that take 10 times and make sure that one of them is the best. And then he was like, no, we're just going to record this once and make it good. And we move on.
And remind me, where is he from?
He's from Buenos Aires.
Okay.
And, yeah, I'm actually about to go down there for the first time to play some shows with him and also alone. Yeah, the story continues.
Is he the person you've collaborated with most in life at this point?
In life? Wow. Probably. Yeah.
Like I'm talking pretty dry here, like hours, man hours. Is that you think that's the most you've been with someone? And what do you, I mean, I think collaboration is very important. And I also don't think it happens naturally in school because you're being graded and, whatever. Everyone's kind of on their own rail in school. And then, because like I have my friend Neve that I've worked with a lot, and I think it's very valuable to growing and understanding what your strengths and weaknesses are, to be with someone at your level or above you, like one rung, and then realizing like, oh, okay, so that's not my strength, and this is, what I can bring to the table. It's kind of like service, like if someone already has something, you don't need to give in that, but you can provide something new.
It's a lot about listening. I mean, which, the things that I could imagine are forever going to be part of my growing and learning in life is like how to be more patient and how to listen better and how to show up for someone else when maybe it's not exactly how you'd imagine it should go.
And so what's the dynamic between, what do you both bring to it? Is someone more orderly, someone more loose?
Yeah. I mean, we're kind of a perfect yin yang, which is, it's funny because the whole idea of people for me originally back even in college was like this sort of, organic shifting of people involved to create one giant organism. And maybe you don't even know who's involved kind of thing, but it became something that felt maybe more appropriate in the core of it, which was like two people bringing maybe some opposite things to find balance. And so I'm very orderly and very like everything is color coded for me. Bass is always blue, kick is always red, root colors, percussions are always yellow, and everything is titled and labeled. And, at this point, it's just been years of making sure that there's not a lot of space between the idea and being able to make it. Mm-hmm. And that has its cons, that has its sort of side of being maybe too precise or too rigid. And so Gonzalo often brought a lot of like looseness and joy and ease in the process. And then musically, I mean, he's an amazing DJ. And so his contributions of like sampling and drums and percussion, and just general production mindset was fantastic. And for me, I'm really melody based and I think over the time, like probably we've rubbed off on each other. So he's, I feel like maybe he's gotten more melodic too, and I've gotten more groovy, and, these things sort of started to blend together. I mean, I would say everything is 50-50, of course, between us.
Nice. Yeah, it's definitely groovy. I was just listening to it. Do you imagine you'll make another People album?
Yeah, we're almost done.
Oh, good.
Yeah, we have, I mean, that's also the fun of it is like on one hand to give a proper space for one release and promote it and play it and figure out what to do with it, while at the same time, of course, you still have this whatever constant creative flow that's coming out. And also it can take a year or more to release a record. So yeah, I think we have another LP, basically. We might split it up into a few. Plus, we're going to be playing our live set, which we're incorporating more equipment into and more sort of live jamming. And at the moment, it's more dance floor oriented, but, a lot of that record is not. So seeing it more for a stage than a booth kind of thing.
What is it like trying to put out stuff in Berlin, and how do you adjust your expectations about, I don't know, how many eyes or listens or followers might be related to the album you just released? Like, is it a different set of expectations because it's Berlin?
Oh man, I mean, I'm still learning this. It's honestly, I think it's also changing constantly, like really quickly, both digitally and physically. So Berlin, I would say there's a big international, a big growing underground of vinyl. And at the same time, it's getting more expensive to make. Plants are being rented out by whatever, Taylor Swift and Universal for tons of releases. So it takes months to get things made. Shipping can be a nightmare anyway. So it's difficult to do something that used to really not be that difficult. And so as far as the vinyl side goes, I mean, a lot of people I know are making amazing records and have labels that they're all either distributing themselves or they have friends with distributions in Berlin. And in Europe, and that goes international. To be honest, I don't know. I don't really know. I know some people are doing well. I know some people are doing it just as kind of a calling card to break even. It's kind of a segue into then performing and getting gigs, which is really always, I guess, where the money is.
The question partially relates to the emotional experience of releasing something that you've worked years on.
Right.
And the expectations that come with that. I'm just curious, in that environment, what you're looking for to feel that you succeeded or failed.
Right. I mean, I think the expectations depend on what you think the music is for, which, of course, in the process of making it, I don't know that really should be a thought, but naturally you figure out pretty quickly, like, yeah, we're not making, for the floor techno for a DJ. We're making basically experimental pop music. So, you can start to see these streams that go to different lakes, essentially, or different oceans of like, okay, this is for distribution for a smaller audience that are more connoisseurs or more audiophiles. And then for me, a lot of the stuff that I'm doing is songwriting and pop oriented and, getting more into kind of scoring film and placing songs and things like that. So yeah, the expectation or the vision of who it's for is really different. There might be some overlap, but I've had to, I think, adjust my expectations as far as what success means. Gonzalo said to me, like, the main success is that we did it, that we put it together, it's out. There's a label that puts it out. And it's, and I agree with him, as far as then the success is like, is that what you're doing for a living is kind of another question, I think. To be honest, like, I think there are things to learn from the process, but I don't really see how any of it could be a failure, depending on what you want, I guess. But, there are things that I want in my career and in my work that I'm making to connect to people and to be able to ride that into definitely a bigger space than, a 200 person club, let's say.
Yeah. The reason I ask is I think it's an important question for artists often, because it's such an intangible process and it's such a personal one. That I think there's like this kaleidoscopic amount of metrics going on. And sometimes being honest about it can be hard. Like I used to experience with the more abstract comics I was making. I would look back and I could see the failures more clearly, actually. Like, oh, that panel doesn't clearly communicate what I'm trying to obfuscate, if that makes sense.
Right.
Like I could have sharpened that mysterious component. And then I started to grapple with, okay, so I used to have the similar thing. It's like break even point, like I just want to keep making the books. But then at some point, maybe because life circumstances changed, I became more dissatisfied with that metric. But I still haven't really gotten to that answer. Sometimes it's easy to have goals, like, let's say ridiculous, like you want to write songs with Taylor Swift, right? And you can barrel down that tunnel and end up completely unhappy with, the whole process that got you there?
Sure. I mean, wow, this whole thing is such a multifaceted diamond, if you want to call it that. But it's like, I mean, happiness is a whole other matter, let's say, because of course
Sure.
I shouldn't be looking for any of this really to give me happiness.
That's fair. Yep.
But I think also it's a funny time now where, I mean, personally, I'm doing different things that all, I think because I'm making different things, and for different, not only music, but also visual work and film work and writing, and kind of, they all take their time. So things go maybe a little slower for me. So I've also adjusted for that. Like, I think I'm more of a slow grow person than like a, jumping out, ready for, for it all to happen. So yeah, I mean, I think the process is the success, honestly, on some level. Is like, if it is processing, if it is going, then that's fantastic. I think
from a more dry metric, because there's pros and cons to this, do you wish that you could sustain your living expenses from your creative output, or do you try to separate those things out?
I mean, essentially I have been doing that.
Yeah.
I've had my freelance stuff and my odd jobs and whatever, but at the moment, yeah, I'm kind of in a place of it being more and more of that. So,
do you like that?
I do. I mean, this comes back to the Berlin versus New York thing. I kind of like the push. I like I like this idea of, somehow knowing that it's like 1 in a million or whatever for this to happen and work and be consistent. Also that it requires, this is about this diamond thing again. It's like there are different angles to approach this stuff. So I'm kind of approaching it both as an artist, but also as a producer, but also as a, with an event mind or an art installation mind or a, written work mind or a collaborative mind, where it's like, oh, maybe actually this is more of a creative advisory role in one project, And so there are all these things that excite me actually, which I think ultimately nowadays you can create as one big sort of mind map career, which I think must have been almost impossible to do, 30, 40 years ago.
Of course.
So, yeah, I mean, that being said, of course, like I would love to be collaborating with my heroes, and I can visualize it and I can, like.
Well, it sounds like you've already done that in some ways, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's not to say that there's like there's no holy grail, right? I mean, that's so much of collaboration has happened, and I think should happen very organically, very seamlessly. Somebody says, oh, you should meet this person, and then you really hit it off. Fantastic. That's really the success for me, is that life feels connected. I mean, that's really all it's about, right? It's like, why am I doing any of this? Is because I'm on one hand trying to connect to myself through the things that I'm doing that makes me feel more alive and more healthy and more inspired. And then also because I want to connect with people. And I mean, collaboration is a huge part of that.
So with the release of Out of Our Hands, how would you describe that to someone who hadn't listened to it?
It's it's a cinematic experience through a little bit of club and a little bit of, wow, how do I describe this? It's very difficult. But this is the elevator pitch part.
Yeah, it's tough. It's always tough.
It's like a synth wave, down tempo, trip hop electronic record. And as you can tell, the difficulty in trying to describe it, because I'm thinking about all the things in it, also lends it to this idea of like, maybe it's hard to sell, but if you actually listen through it, then that all makes sense.
Right. Yeah. By definition, things that are easily described are easier to sell, I think.
Well, that was kind of what I was going to say about your other question too, is like, there's a lot of incredible music being made, which is more and more probably getting discovered through algorithm or through the internet, but I'm always amazed by really how much undiscovered stuff there is, and people are really digging and going through Bandcamp or going through, record stores and finding things. You realize that the difference between great music being recognized as great by, thousands or millions of people versus being hidden away and listened to like by 50 people is essentially some combination of luck, good PR, one good video or campaign. I mean, who knows? Like there's so many I think the old idea was like, oh, if you're great, it'll just work, and the reality is like, there's so much talent. There's so many people that are really creating. And now you can create, I'm making tracks on my phone, it's ridiculous. Like, I think it was Steve Lacy produced a bunch of Kendrick tracks on his iPhone. Your imagination is your only limit at this point.
Yeah, it's true. I'll find artists who are dead or visual artists and they're amazing and they're irrelevant and they're barely on the internet. Sometimes they're just on the edges. So I'll buy a book or something just to because they might just disappear. And I try to remember that with humility. You can make very good work and end up there. It's just the way of life. That's the
thing. There's a technical side to this, and I do reach out to people that know more about this than I do. And frankly, I don't really have the time at the moment to be studying metrics and everything. But there's a kind of, for me also, the process of not getting so hung up on it, which again has, I think, created more opportunity or more joy or more connection. I think it's very easy for me, back to this, New Yorker thing of the hustle and the how do I turn a profit or make this work or all these ideas that really have nothing to do with the artistic process. That being said, if you're an amazing artist, but you don't know how to talk to people and you don't know how to think about, how to present something in a way that people can actually consume and not be confused, then yeah, you're kind of flailing.
You're at the behest of other forces, I find.
Right, exactly. That's a good way to put that. It's if you can actually write your own narrative around the work, then you're not going to be as in a position to be controlled or to be manipulated or to be misunderstood. That's the main thing, I think, mainly.
Sure. Yeah.
Clear communication.
Yeah, if you ever become even remotely relevant, a narrative will be applied to you. So yeah, definitely trying to construct it before is certainly a good strategy. It's not always easy because by definition, you have to start hemming yourself in. You have to start understanding what sides of yourself in the future will need to flourish. And it's a kind of a process of maturation, I think, at least how I understand maturation, where you're accepting the restrictions or constraints of what you're presenting to the world.
Also that everyone's going to have their own take no matter what. I know that I remember this moment where I was renting this place on Lower East Side before I moved to Berlin. And my friend and I, Scott, found Star Wars, the first, episode 4, in the garbage, a DVD. And so we brought it up and we would kind of religiously watch it, but with commentary on. We'd get stoned and watch this and then make music. And first of all, watching Star Wars with commentary is extraordinary. Watching any great movie with commentary is pretty amazing. And anyway, point being, I was listening to all this commentary and you'd hear also Harrison Ford talking. And in this stoned moment, I was like, oh my God, what it must be like to be Harrison Ford, Han Solo. You can never not be Han Solo or Indiana Jones the rest of your life. This entire world is around you. Oh, what's up, Han? And it's you're in such a funny, privileged trap. And so it really struck me. It really freaked me out, actually, because I think at that point I was kind of I could whatever, be playing to millions of people and be on billboards, whatever. And then part of me was like, well, who's saying that? What is that urge? Where is that coming from? And to just sit with it and not engage it too deeply, or be wary of the fame voice. Because also that sounds like a nightmare, on some level.
I think, I think it is for many people. And I will
But
say, to counter what I just said, I don't think Star Wars could ever be made and not be as relevant as it is. I don't know why I feel that way about Star Wars, but there's something very magical about that film.
you know what? I just watched the other night again, which is the right before Star Wars, George Lucas THX. What was it 1180?
Yeah. 1138. Yeah.
1138, right? Which is extraordinary because that was like a college film, and the tastefulness of it, the aesthetic, the sound design, but also a lot of these little motifs and dialogues even, and camera things, they all got translated into Star Wars, which was really inspiring because it was also like made me remember that the best things take not only time, but like honing the craft, honing the idea. And I'm noticing that also in just like, there are songs I'm about to perform on Friday, piano and voice in Berlin, which I've never done actually here for 10 years, which is kind of insane because it's the thing I've been doing the longest, and the thing that I probably most want to do. And there are songs there that I have been kind of reworking since college or high school almost, because there's something in it, some nugget that feels like, okay, this is beyond me and this is timeless. And this is just to be playful and curious. And to come back to your thing about Star Wars, I think that's what makes it so magical, is this, like, it just gives me so much sense of like curiosity. There's like a curiosity about these worlds and these creatures, and everything's really alive and organic. I mean, the commentary of Ben Burt, who did the sound design for it, he's talking about how like they had this rule that nothing would be strictly electronic. So even like R2-D2 is a mix of, I think, the ARP 2600 with like human, like pitched down and pitched up, and just that beauty. It's a beauty of like mixing things that again shouldn't be mixed together, or when you do, you create something greater than the sum of the parts. But what makes that so much for you, though?
What do you mean?
Star Wars being such a
God, I don't know. It was like so important to me, and then I kind of love the arc of it just being like drained of all of its life force by Disney. But because I think there's something beautiful about that. It actually sent me down this very interesting rabbit hole of like, why is it hard to make a trilogy or anything beyond it without great integrity? The Matrix 2 and 3 are horrible films. And the dynamic of success is what interested me. Like Lucas said, if he ever had enough money, he would go back to making films like THX, and he never did. And the Wachowskis also just openly admitted basically that like 2 and 3 were money grabs. And there's something to be learned about that. Like, I don't think one should be afraid of success, because hopefully we can all rise to its challenges and be better. But there is something very interesting about, like, I haven't watched all the Indiana Joneses, but yeah, it's really hard to follow up success with authentic, genuine expression, even if it's the second Strokes album, which I think is good, but it's effectively the first album again. And then the third album is like some weird spin-off where it feels like they overreact and like don't want to be judged in any way, which I still like because I like the Strokes. But it's very interesting for me to just observe how bands and artists handle eyes on them and money, etc.
Totally. I mean, I'm not at that place in my life. I'm kind of curious to be, though. I'm curious what it's like to navigate that, because I think part of it is, I've tried in my way through my life to always kind of break my own sense of whatever, my own sense of trying to be something, while also still having the hunger that propels me to do the things I do. So, I think I'm trying to think what a good example would be of people that did follow-up records that were just like, oh, you like that? Let me show you how much of it, like, not giving a shit I am.
I've always thought Radiohead is incredible at sustaining.
Yeah, that's a great example. I mean, but you also get that energy of just like they somehow, I get this bunker feeling, like they're in their bunker sort of disconnected from the world doing their stuff, and they come out because they have to once in a while, but basically they're doing what they want to do. And what was I also just thinking? Oh, MGMT, management. That's like a funny story of how they made their big pop, kind of slightly inside jokey first record that were like turned into these iconic, hipster theme songs, essentially, whatever people were calling it, and then followed up with like a bizarre prog rock record, which I love. I mean, that record's amazing. And it was essentially like, okay, we're on Columbia Records and we really don't care,
Right.
And essentially made very increasingly bizarre records. And then came back and made something also new and sort of wonderful for them. So yeah, I mean, there are a lot of good examples. I mean, obviously also if we go back to like jazz people or like, I don't know. I mean, how many amazing records did Miles Davis make? And
I admit I'm not terribly informed about jazz.
Yeah. Well,
I'm waiting. I'm waiting.
On that note, I'm going to shout out WBGO, which is my your local jazz station that I always listen to the moment I get back to New York, but also listen to in Berlin when I'm feeling homesick.
Interesting.
Love it. It's great.
I can access that from northern New Jersey. Yeah,
it's in Newark.
Okay.
It's 88.3.
Right.
WBGO.
I would be remiss not to mention the visual language of the album, which, if you can explain it without being flattering to me, but why do you think my visual language worked for this album?
Well, so I forget how exactly. I think when you and I first met was also when we were first starting to get this record together, but also kind of imagine what the visual component is that matches. And the sound, and we were playing with different logo ideas and word plays and visual words. And it just really kind of wasn't landing. And then when I saw your stuff, I was like, okay, like you get it. And it's like a bit rough, but it's held together really well. It can be really sharp, but also really like kind of hard to focus on. There's something like playfully perverted, but in like not a trying to like shock you way, more in like a very tasteful, like it kind of hinting at something under the surface. And I think for me, that's always ideally the music that I make does that. And particularly for this record, it was like, okay, we know it's black and white. We just sort of felt it. It's like, it's a black and white record. It's a black and white film.
Right.
It's a process of, for me, the narrative is the process of also like going through loss and heartbreak and digging in and then letting go and going through this catharsis and dark night of the soul. But then also there's kind of a techno track in there, and then you're off to the dance floor. And then, it's this process of self-discovery and letting go. And there's actually, I think, there's a track called Let It Go. So that somehow just made sense with your visual style. And then when you and I started talking about it, it's like so easy also to talk with you about like underlying principles of things. And so in this case, the underlying principle of people being this space and people or energies of caring about each other and finding sort of a give and take and a balance. And yet at the same time, knowing that can be really messy and like embracing the sort of rough edges of it all.
Yeah. That makes sense. I actually think that helps describe the music even more finely than the elevator pitch in a weird way.
Yeah.
I do think that oblique approach is often what is easier to describe art with sometimes.
Well, to be honest, and when you asked me that question, I probably should have said like how I would describe it is, two opposites attracting and finding a way to become one, or whatever. I mean, labeling any music with genre these days just seems totally insane to me. But I'm holding the record in my hand. I'm looking at it. You need to have one in yours soon.
Oh yeah, we got to put it in the record store too.
Oh yeah, great. but it's beautiful. Yeah. It's matte, which also is perfect for what you matte, did. Yeah, because you had this woodcut thing going on the front, and it's beautiful. It's very beautiful. And,
well, what else do we need to say? People need to listen.
Yeah, I mean, I'll be back in New York December, last 2 weeks of December. So it'd be nice to see you. And also, I mean, the thing is, every time I come back, I'm always kind of putting on a few different hats. And so one hat is like, I'm going to go DJ on December 15th in a club. Then I'm also preparing with a friend of mine, a kind of private dinner with music live created around the meal. Nice. And then also coming in with a sort of sense of like film world and looking for people in New York that I might shoot something with. And yeah, it's just,
you're busy despite trying not to be busy in some sense.
Well, that's the thing, right? It's like the balance of like, okay, can I just be still for a minute?
I've come for me, it's like, I just can't be. And I don't mean that in like an ADHD way. I don't mean like I'm fidgeting like a squirrel. But in respect to mental processes, it's just not like, I have to go into them to feel a sense of silence. I can't go the other direction, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I mean, it's funny. I was thinking about this last night. Like, there are times in my life that I've been so hungry for meditation and retreats. And, I used to do month-long retreats for years. And it was just something that was, I was just hungry. It was like needing vitamin C or something. But of course, that is just practice, and practice you have to do all the time. So I was thinking about how my practice became something else, sort of related, but in a way, just the practice of like being present to things happening, whether you like what they are or not. Yeah. Also, slowly, it's been helping me not be so fixated on all the things at once. And also recently, something that's come up is how extraordinary gratitude is.
Oh yeah, I was going to say that sounds like what you're experiencing. It's hard to talk about without falling into every cliche or trope about it. But that's why there exist those things about it. And I think sometimes artists have an aesthetic aversion to the ordinary or mundane or trope, and that's a dangerous thing because very ordinary things like gratitude can change your whole orientation to reality.
I mean, it's so not ordinary, though. That's the funny part. Is it's so. I mean, I don't know about everybody else's upbringing in the world and whatever, but like, at least New York has its fair share of cynicism, and Berlin for sure. And so there's a kind of modern, postmodern, postmodern, like kind of cynicism about the world and how fucked everything is. And I, on some level, of course, you can always engage things like that because there's a lot of it, but there's also so much of what your own reality is, your own perspective. And so I can acknowledge, like horrific things that are happening, and at the same time wake up and just be like, okay, I can only really be responsible for myself in at least in this one moment right now. So let me use that to remind myself, wow, like this is amazing that I have this bed and that like the electricity turns on and that like there are countless people around that are making this happen that I never see, and that are just all contributing to being able to live comfortably. Like it's amazing, and that's the funny thing. There's so many things that are taken as ordinary that are extraordinary, totally extraordinary.
Yeah. I mean, like a Hallmark card, kind of, or Cafe Gratitude. I don't know if you were aware of this place in California. Blew my fucking mind. I hate it. But it's like I think you had to say something you were grateful for to order like a latte or something.
I mean, it's sweet. I get it. I get what you mean, but it's like better than them saying, tell me something you hate about me.
That sounds like a cool business from like a Philly or New York perspective. That would probably do very well. But
there is a restaurant where they insult the people when you
I've
order.
I've heard of that. Yeah, I think there's like this weird tightrope walk of the kind of spiritual or cosmic truth that the world, in some sense, is perfect. But that everyday life is obviously, for many people and all people, a flawed experience full of imperfect things. And I don't really know how to deal with that per se, but I know that gratitude is the first step in making any sort of progress within yourself or outside of yourself, I think.
It's like the palate cleanser. I mean, in some way it's, I mean, this is my like Buddhist side coming out here, but essentially my understanding and my own experience, despite it not always being my experience, is that our root nature is peace and is whatever you might call happiness. And then we have all of these things that we've acquired and habits and hangups and traumas and also justifications for, yes, of course I should feel this way because everything's totally messed up, right now. But like all of that is kind of like this layer cake on top. And so that's why I feel like gratitude, and as my mom has been telling me, just, like coming up with a couple things you're grateful for every morning, it's like, it is transformative actually, and then none of that other stuff is going anywhere. It's not like,
no.
It's not like, I think a lot of the time, especially within spiritual ideas, people take it as a sort of all or nothing, and I've definitely taken that even in my own practice of a kind of like, you're either, totally at peace or you're a mess. And it's just not like that, in fact, it's almost never like that.
I would be comfortable saying it's never like that. And
it's never like that.
On this plane of existence, maybe there's one where, where that exists. I'm not aware of it, but,
well, it's change. I think the point is to just be with the change, which, I like anybody probably is struggling with, because it's like there's so many things, especially now, that are changing so fast and hard to just keep up with how much. I was just thinking, like, we're not really meant to take in as much information as we do.
Not even close. And
we don't know how to process it. And then on top of that, we don't really have like media training, and we don't have like all of these sort of what seem like basic, like I feel like, whatever they used to teach in the 50s in schools as like, well, what you need to know to be like, a good housewife, or like to be like, a good engineer. Like, I feel like now just everybody needs to just have media studies 101 right off the bat, and like figure out like how to engage, whatever the onslaught of information that is always largely made to manipulate or made to shift your attention on some level. So yeah, it's pretty hard to develop gratitude in that environment if you enter into it, at least in my experience. I don't know why, they're just at odds. Well, so that's the thing. It's like, essentially the greatest revolutionary force could be gratitude, it could be, it's too easy to say, oh, just love everybody and be nice. It's like, yeah, but people that are nice can also be horrible. So I think it's more like, just developing a space for gratitude. It's like, I always think about all this stuff, especially if I talk to people that don't relate to the idea of meditation or spirituality. I'm just like, it's push-ups. It's just heart push-ups. It's just, it's just, mind push-ups. That's all it is. You don't do push-ups, your arms start getting weak, it's just kind of, taking care. Well, it's a good place to leave people. But I also want you to kind of, if someone wanted to experience your authentic self via the music, where would they start and end? I'd hate to say Spotify, but, you must. I guess, the André Baum experience is including People, and Beyondré. I think from that, it splinters off into other collaborations and whatever. You can find records on Discogs, and you can see videos on YouTube, and there's all, the octopus of the internet. Okay. Right on. Trying to think if there are any shows coming up that are local. But well, you never know who's listening. You could say any show's coming up. All right, just around the world list. Yeah, this is a global podcast. if you're in Uruguay on December 30th and January 4th, I'll be playing. If you're in Buenos Aires and January 13th and 20th, I'm playing. LA February. So yeah, tune in.
And they can find that information on a website or Instagram or something.
Instagram, yeah. I mean, that's the other thing. Is like, part of me is, of course, using Instagram and kind of enjoying the interaction of it and being able to, direct to friend, direct to fan, direct to audience, whatever is extraordinary. On the other hand, it's all, on Meta servers to the point where like even the algorithm is picking up on, I think, like even emails that I'm sending to people that have supposedly nothing to do with Meta, which is also sort of blowing my mind. But anyway, Instagram is certainly the place that I would be promoting any of these things at the moment.
Right on.
Yeah.
All right, let's try to connect.
Yeah, please, man. It's a pleasure to catch up again.
For sure. Have a good day.
You too. Ciao.
Peace.
Bye.
Music by Dori Bavarsky and Mingjia Chen. Next up, we have Matthew Caulfield. Enjoy your week.